and they pointed out this is actually the wrong type of test for Japan.
Japan's very specific with what it requires.
Hey guys, and welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name's Luke, and I'm making this video because after almost a year and a half of anticipation, preparation, planning, and trying to cut our way through all the bureaucratic nonsense, I finally arrived here in Japan. Now, if you watched our last video, you'll remember that my wife, Natalie, and I were in the final phases of packing and preparation, making sure that we had all our ducks in a row for this big move. Now, we were a little concerned that it wasn't actually going to happen because one of the last pieces of this we needed was my actual entrance visa to get into Japan. Now, my company had applied for it almost a month ago, but the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly. So we didn't actually get my visa issued until the very last business day before my flight. So my flight out was on a Monday evening, and it was that previous Friday that we actually got an email from the Japanese consulate that we could come in and pick up my visa that day, so that I'd be good to go and able to enter Japan. Now, after we had our visa, we only needed one more thing. If you're familiar with international travel these days, you probably know that most countries and airlines require you to submit a negative COVID PCR test taken within 72 hours of your flight. A lot of COVID tests will take 2 to 3 days to get your results back, which is not fast enough because you need it within 72 hours and you need it before you go onto the plane. So this 2 to 3 days business really doesn't work. So we found a place that did a 1-hour rapid turnaround test. We actually, after I got tested and got my result back, we were showing this test to somebody in the email, trying to get forms filled out, and they pointed out this is actually the wrong type of test for Japan. Japan's very specific with what it requires. Now, there's two very important criteria that the Japanese government requires to recognize it as a valid PCR test to let you into the country. One of those is the specific type of test, what the lab is actually doing to determine whether or not there's COVID-19 present in the sample. But the other piece of it that a lot of people don't think about is how the sample is taken. So I went to this lab and got the right type of test, but the wrong sample type. Now, Japan requires what's called a nasal pharyngeal swab. You might better know it as the brain tickle swab, where they, take the swab and stick it way back up in there, because they're swabbing what's called your nasopharynx, which is really far back in your nose. But they also have other tests that, just swab sort of the front of your nose or the mid part of your nose, the mid-turbinate. And that was the type that I got, and I didn't know because they, just listed the test type on their website, not how they would take the sample, and I got lost in the medical jargon. So we get my test result back, and it's the wrong type of test. And so now Natalie and I are scrambling, trying to figure out, is this gonna work? Do we need to go get me tested somewhere else? We start calling doctor's offices, we start calling labs, and no lab or doctor's office can get me in to test me and get the results turned around in time, because most of these PCR kits are actually shipped off to a lab somewhere else. They test you in one place and they gotta go send that lab sample off to a laboratory to get tested. And with it being the weekend, I was flying out on a Monday, so I had to get tested. I couldn't get tested on Friday because it was after business hours. So I had to get tested on Saturday, and you can't ship anything or get it tested on Saturday or Sunday. So none of these test results were gonna get turned around fast enough. And we even realized that this rapid test kit that this company did, I was like, why can't I just go back and have them swab the right part of my nose and give me the right type of test? Well, this is where it gets really weird and complicated. The FDA, when they approve these test kits, approve them for a very specific way, right? So this specific test kit that takes them only an hour to turn around can only be done with this, nasal mid-turbinate swab, not the nasopharyngeal swab. And everybody we talked to, even the person working at the lab, was like, this is dumb. We don't know why this is. We can't get it changed. But we're legally not allowed to, by the FDA, to just swab a different part of your nose and give you this test. So we're in panic mode. We can't find a place to do it. Finally, one really helpful nurse at a doctor's office suggests, why don't you go look at airports? Sometimes airports have special facilities that specialize in this travel testing 72-hour window thing. So we look in the Houston area, and Houston International Airport and Houston Hobby Airport don't really have anything that's going to work on the weekend for me. But we did find that the airport I was flying through, LAX in California, does have a lab. And fortunately, I had a long layover in LAX, so I was able to get off the plane and get tested. And then I had to get this, test result back so that I could get on my flight and so that I could get into Japan. Now, this is where it gets even weirder. Japan is really big into paper. They love paper documentation, and a lot of times electronic copies don't cut it. So they were very specific. They needed a physical paper copy. And I was talking with my orchestra here and the personnel manager that was helping me through this whole process. And they're like, you need to print this out. So we start researching where in the LAX airport can you print something? And the answer is basically nowhere. You basically have to hop in a cab and go find a FedEx print shop or something like that and print something, which is going to take too much time. I'm really worried about missing my flight or having an issue. So this is just really frustrating debacle. Fortunately, my parents happen to have this small portable printer, and I was talking to Natalie. I was like, why don't I just put the printer in my bag? It's extra space that it'll take up, it's extra weight, but if I can just whip it out in the middle of the airport and print my COVID test, I'll be good to go. So believe it or not, that's what I had to do to make sure I didn't run into any issues or miss my flight. And so I could have this physical piece of paper that said that I tested negative for COVID. So that was just a whole fiasco. It threw us for a loop. It really got us behind on the whole packing thing. It made this just a lot more stressful. But we managed to get all our ducks in a row. Got the test was negative, got it printed out. And so I was good to go, good to get on this plane and fly to Japan. So we finally finished getting my bags packed, and Natalie drove me to the Houston Hobby Airport, where we had to say our goodbyes, which was really tough. It was hard to separate so that I could come here and start my job in Japan, and Natalie stayed in the States while we tried to work out her visa status and get her over here to join me as soon as possible. So that was tough, but we worked through it together, and I got on my plane, flew to LAX, did the whole testing thing, printed out my PCR test, and then my next flight was on Korean Airlines from LAX to Seoul, Korea, and then from Seoul, Korea across that little bay between Korea and Japan to Osaka. So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience on Korean Airlines. It was actually a really cool experience. They were super organized. There was maybe 12 staff members all working on getting everybody checked in for this flight. It was super meticulous, super organized. I handed them my passport and they're like, oh, you're going to Japan. We got to double check a bunch of things because Japan is being super strict with their immigration. So they went through all my paperwork, made sure everything was in order, highlighted all the correct information to make sure I had my ducks in a row. Unfortunately, all that went off without a hitch. So went through security, got to the gate, got on the plane. It was one of these big planes that's got 3 seats on either side, and then there's 2 aisles, and then 3 seats in the center. Fortunately, the plane wasn't too full, so I had an empty seat next to me, which was really nice. But you got on the plane and they handed you, you got a pillow, you got a blanket. They even gave you a pair of disposable slippers that you could, take your shoes off and then wear slippers around the plane, I guess. It was really sort of an interesting experience. It's the first, really long international flight I've been on. I think it was a 13-hour flight taking off at 11:50 p.m. And what that means with a 13-hour flight and then a 14-hour time difference, the time zone I'm in Japan is 14 hours ahead of Central Time. So that means I took off at 11:30 p.m. on August 9th, and I didn't land until August 11th. So I completely missed the day of August 10th because it was a 14-hour flight or 13-hour flight, and a 14-hour time change leaping forward. So it was a little discombobulating for my body. Oh, and another really cool fancy thing about Korean Airlines, you know how you got to sit down and normally they'll have the flight attendants or you'll have to watch a safety video or something? Well, believe it or not, Korean Airlines safety video was literally a BTS music video. The whole thing was like 5 or 6 minutes long and went through all the safety stuff, but it also had BTS like singing and dancing in it and whatnot. It was pretty wild, pretty extra, but kind of cool, kind of a fun way to mix it up. So we had this long flight. They served 2 meals, but they had a Western style option and a Korean style option. So I actually had both the Korean options. One was a bibimbap, which if you've ever had that, it's delicious. It's like basically like a rice bowl with meat and a bunch of like cooked vegetables and some like, normally you get kimchi. There wasn't quite kimchi. It wasn't like all the stuff, but it was, you know, you had some like pickled spicy stuff. And it was really, really tasty. They serve you seasonings and a drink service and all this stuff. Really quite fancy, a lot more than you get on any sort of domestic flight where they just sort of chuck peanuts and pretzels at you. And then they had another meal service. It was more like a breakfast thing where I had like a rice porridge. So anyways, with the travel, it was about like a 38 hour travel experience with all the layovers and the flights and everything. I unfortunately don't sleep very well on planes and stuff. So I managed to get, you know, a little bit of like sleep here and there, but really low quality stuff. So by the end, I was really sort of sleep deprived. We went through Seoul Airport. I've got a couple of videos and pictures. The airport in Seoul was massive and super fancy. I got into the international terminal that I was flying out of. And they had like a huge open area that had like trees planted and like a music stage with like a piano and this giant like mirrored globe thing that you could walk into and sit in. It was pretty crazy. And then I'm walking around the terminal and they've got just so many designer stores, like everything from like Gucci to Prada to, you know, I can't even name all the ones. It was ridiculous. There's probably 30, 40 designer stores in this terminal. And then I'm walking through this terminal and I come to another big open area that looks exactly the same with like trees and this piano and this globe thing. And I'm like, oh dang, I walked in a complete circle. I must be lost. But then I started looking around and realized that there were 2 of these exact same areas in the terminal. Like the terminal was so big that they had made 2 of these giant areas where they planted trees and everything. It was really ridiculous. I've never seen anything like it airport wise in the United States. It was a really, really fancy, nice airport. So I was only there for a few hours, then hopped on my last flight, which was a short flight in the morning. I think it took off at like 9:30 a.m. Local time in Korea and landed at like 11:20, 11:30. It was, you know, maybe an hour and a half, 2-hour flight. That flight was, you know, spent most of the time working on like paperwork for customs and quarantine processing and all that stuff. And then we landed at the Osaka International Airport Terminal. And the very first thing, once you got off the plane, you had to go through quarantine processing. So Japan, being very strict with their immigration, is being really careful. So let me tell you about this, because this was pretty crazy too. So they basically shut down the entire international terminal and made sort of roped off pathways with a lot of signage. So basically you were sort of funneled through this system that had probably like 12 or 14 different stations where you would stop and like sit down or talk to a person and do something. So you'd show them like some piece of your paperwork. At one stop, we had to, you know, take another COVID test. This time it was actually a saliva test as opposed to a swab. So then you submit your test result and you keep going through. They even had a station where you had to sit down with somebody and show them your smartphone. Japan requires you to have a smartphone, and they require you to install some of their like health services apps on it for your 14-day quarantine, so that they can keep track of your location and make sure that you're actually observing your quarantine. So they had me sit down with somebody and they went through all my phone settings and made sure I had the apps open on my phone and set up, and had put in all the right information. They even, made sure that they had my correct phone number and email. Like, so the lady like sent me an email and she wanted to see the email she had just sent me on my phone. Like super thorough and meticulous. It took a little while to get through. I think it was like an hour and a half or so to get through the whole process. And by that point, they had our COVID test results back. Of course, mine came back negative again. And so then once you finally got through all that, then you started the customs process. So, there's more forms you got to fill out. And then I got to the actual customs officer who reviews all your stuff and make sure you're not trying to sneak into the country for some reason. So they sent me back around to sit outside an office while they actually created the little residence card, to prove, I am supposed to be in Japan and I'm here on a work visa for such and such company. So they made that card, and then I finally got to go through, and then go down to baggage claim. So I thought the process was over, but then I got down to baggage claim, and there's very strict sort of things internationally on what you can bring in, what you can't. So I get down the escalator to baggage claim, where they've got all of our bags sort of really neatly grouped up. So they had pulled them off of the turnstile and looked at all the labels and grouped them together. So all 3 of my suitcases were right there together. So I walked up and I grabbed my suitcases and rolled them forward to another station where they had, and this was really cute, they had maybe 8 handlers that had little beagle dogs. These cute little dogs, they're leading these cute little dogs around my my bags to sniff them, to make sure I'm not trying to smuggle anything in. But all that was fine, and I went out. At that point, this is where all the planning from my employer came in really handy. So they had already hired a driver to come pick me up at the airport. So I went through security. There was a driver standing there with a board with my name on it. So he picked me up, got my suitcases into his tiny little car, and then we hopped on the road, and they had to drive me from Osaka International Airport all the way to Kobe, because that's where the Crown Plaza Hotel that I'm staying in right now and quarantining in for the next 14 days is located. So it was about an hour and a half drive along the coast. But Osaka and Kobe, giant port cities, so you have the industrial side on this side. But then I was surprised by how lush and green the scenery was to the right. So you had some city buildings, but it was amazing how close the mountains were actually to the coast. There couldn't have been more than 20, 30 miles or so of city, and then you just had these lush green mountains that were just gorgeous. So it was sort of an interesting juxtaposition. You had the port industrial warehouse side on this side of the freeway, and then you had some urban areas, and then just these beautiful mountains. So it was really, really nice scenery. But at this point, I'm quite sleep deprived. So I am dragging. I'm trying to fall asleep in the cab, but a little excited that I'm in Japan, and also having trouble falling asleep in a car. So I finally get to the hotel, and I started experiencing this, what you've probably heard about Japan, this high service mentality, this, very polite and high hospitality expectations. So I get out of this taxi and I start trying to help the taxi driver, because I've got a lot of bags. I've got my horn, my backpack, 3 suitcases. So it's 5 bags in total. So I'm trying to help him get this stuff out of the trunk. And he's trying to talk to me in Japanese, oh, let me do it. Trying to be super polite. So he goes inside the hotel and gets one of these carts to put my luggage on. He tries to load it on there and doesn't let me help at all. And then I go in, and the hotel is waiting for me. They know that I'm quarantining there. So then they sort of lead me up to my room. So they pass me off to this really quite petite Japanese woman who takes me up to my room and guides me down the hallway. So we get up on the elevator and get off, and I start trying to pull the cart, and she's like, "Oh, just leave it." So she tries to get me to leave the cart, of course, all in Japanese, on the elevator. So we leave my luggage on the elevator, and she walks me to my room, and opens the door for me. And I go into the room, and then she goes back to the elevator, which I guess didn't go down yet, and like gets the elevator back open and grabs the cart and brings it to my room. And then she tries to like get all of my bags off the cart. And I feel so bad for her because I packed these bags to capacity, and they're each like a solid 50 pounds. And I'm just sort of like standing there helplessly while this, very petite Japanese lady is like struggling to get these off of the cart and like into my room. And like, I just want to be like, oh, let me help. But like every time I try to help, she's like, oh, like, let me do it. Like she's like trying to be very hospitable and kind. So it was sort of this, cute interaction, interesting experience. Then I finally got my bags in the room and I was here. And at that point, it was just a huge weight off my shoulders. I was so happy to just have arrived. I was so tired, exhausted. So I just threw my stuff, down on the bed, took a shower because I felt gross after, going through airport after plane. And so I hopped in the shower, rinsed off, got comfy in some new clothes, let my friends and family members, my wife, know that I had made it safely, and I passed out at 5 p.m., which of course meant that I woke up at like 2 a.m. So anyways, that's the story of my, sort of ridiculous travels to Japan. It was definitely not easy, and definitely way more complicated, traveling internationally during the pandemic, moving internationally, especially during the pandemic, than it would at any other time. But I'm super happy to be here. So before I go, I just want to share some really exciting news that Natalie and I got just a couple of days ago. We managed to get in touch with the Japanese consulate in Houston, and we explained our situation to them. And now that I am in Japan and I actually have my residence card, so I'm officially a resident of Japan, we now qualify for her to apply for her visa and get her visa issued despite all the lockdown on immigration right now, because we are a separated family. And that actually falls into the category of one of their special circumstances to get people there. So it's sort of weird that Natalie wasn't able to come with me because we were going to be a separated family. But now that I'm here and she's in the States, we are a separated family, and she is now eligible to apply for her visa. So she's getting all our paperwork together. She can get that submitted, and we're hoping to get her here in Japan with me in about a month or so. So we're really happy to have that information. There were some fears that we had that, with the pandemic and all the craziness of the past year and a half or so, that, we were going to be stuck apart for a really long time. So it's really a blessing. We're really excited to have that news and to know that she's going to be able to get here to join me before too long. So that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And next week, I want to show you guys around my hotel room here in quarantine and what it's like to quarantine in a Japanese hotel for 14 days during the pandemic. There were definitely some things that I expected and definitely some things that surprised me. So I can't wait to share that with you. Until next time, take care.